I mean, it's proof that the Biden administration can be pushed on issues that are this common sense as well. Like, I mean, wh- when you first began, I know you've been working with some Democrats and powers that be to really advocate for broad student debt cancellation. What was some of the reaction that you got within the Democratic Party? Was it, you know, from the beginning of your activism on this topic 15 years ago or whenever you began to now? Um, what was some of the change that you saw in uh in the response from Democrats, especially like a Democrat like Joe Biden, who is as conservative as you can kind of get, or at least was perceived that way going into the White House in the modern Democratic Party?
I think it's really important to name Joe Biden's allegiances throughout his career. I mean, he has very much been a servant of creditor interests. He was a key player in the 2005 bankruptcy reform bill, where he got a lot of bipartisanship. There's a lot of Republican support. And that bill actually stripped critical bankruptcy protections from student debtors. He comes from Delaware, the credit card capital of the world. So I think we have to also be, realistic. Who were we pushing in this moment? We were pushing a man who has not been a friend of debtors historically. And, this is absolutely a movement that came from the grassroots, and many of the legal arguments for debt cancellation, both for students of predatory for-profit colleges and for broader relief, also came from outsiders. And the pickup came because we, under the Obama administration, so when Biden was vice president, we successfully forced the Department of Education to start issuing a trickle of relief for people who had gone to a now defunct predatory for-profit chain called Corinthian. And so we proved in that moment that debt could be canceled, that student debt could be canceled by the federal government. And it was actually Elizabeth Warren who was paying close attention to that, that picked up that possibility and listened to activists, including the Debt Collective, who were saying, this is possible. You can do it all. It can all go. The legal authority exists. And so it was through progressives in the Democratic Party that, it was then picked up by Chuck Schumer, which, the Debt Collective was very surprised by. And he's been an ally in this, even if, he wasn't pushing for full cancellation like we were. He was also with Warren and pushing for 50,000. Bernie Sanders, raised the stakes by campaigning in 2019, 20, not in 2016, but in the last presidential primary cycle on full cancellation. That actually was thanks to Ilhan Omar, who was the first person to say, no, let's just do it all. So it came in through, again, from the grassroots to progressive officials who, helped really mainstream this issue. And those officials ultimately began parroting what was the Debt Collective line, which is this can be canceled through executive action. In fact, the Debt Collective wrote an example of an executive order that, hey, Joe Biden signed here, working with lawyers close to us who are experts on this issue, and so it was, we want as organizers to have people in power ultimately parroting our phrase and saying, Joe Biden, with the flick of a pen, you can cancel student debt. And they did. And then people, began to believe this is reality, right? Actually, he could cancel student debt with a flick of a pen. And what we saw this week is that we were right. And this is the thing we need to take away from this moment. If Joe Biden can cancel $10,000 or $20,000 of debt through executive action, he can cancel it all. He can cancel all federal student loan debt, and he should. And we've shown that it's possible. I really don't want people to despair if they're still trapped under, six figures, because we just need to keep pushing. That, this is not a handout. This is not a favor. This is because debtors have come out of the shadows and demanded this and built the political power. So, I'm encouraged that we can move the administration in the right direction, and one day somebody will cancel it all. Mark my words.
I mean, well, we need the legal team to pour over and come back to Joe Biden with a memo a year later on if there's authority that would allow for him to do another 10,000. I mean, I'm joking, but it to me, it was frustrating that it took this long. I'm happy that it ended up happening, but the whole convoluted, like, we need to consult with lawyers about whether or not I have the authority to do this was a stalling tactic, in my view, because as you say, there's nothing precluding him from canceling at all. And it's not a zero sum game as is being framed by a lot of people in the press, as if student debt cancellation will take away in terms of um, tax breaks for middle class families. No, this is just within the executive authority. Uh
Mhm.
there's no loser if student debt is fully canceled. Um and I think that that's important to repeat too, because it's just an entirely different authority than, like, say, tax making policy. No, this is just the federal government deciding we're not going to seek repayment on this. Boom. End of story.
I mean, absolutely. And so, if you, it's basically the same logic as if I lent you $10, I don't have to collect on it, right? And these are the legal authorities are drawn from legislation, actually. So this is actually executive authority that was already granted by Congress. First in the Higher Education Act of 1965, but then more recently with the passage of something called HEROES from 2003. So lots of Republicans voted for those bills. So this authority is completely legitimate. Your point about who wins and who loses is so important. There's just been so much concern, trolling, and bad faith criticisms of this, as those, canceling debts for some is going to make some other category of people poor. It's the typical divide and conquer approach that we see. And the fact is that, everybody will be better off when our family members, our friends, our neighbors are not saddled with unpayable debt that has disastrous consequence for their lives. I mean, people, can't they can't buy homes. They experience housing insecurity. They don't go to the doctor. They're not able to do the things they want to do with their lives. They're not able to pursue, things like, public service, being a public defender or a teacher or a nurse in this world where costs are rising. So, I think we're all going to be better off economically, but also just socially, by freeing people from this weight. It's not something I personally benefit from. I paid off my student debt years ago. This is something I'm doing because I think education is a public good. I want people to not be shackled by debts, and in paying the federal government, monthly payments with interest. That it's just unnecessary. The government should be making revenue through the student lending system. The Department of Education should be funding education directly for everybody to benefit from as a public good. And so that
Well,
is something that will require legislation, though. There is not the executive authority to do that. And we have to be politically strategic and realistic as we move towards that aim, because that is something that the president cannot do with the flick of a pen.
no, but at the same time, free college for all, as we saw, as outlined by the Bernie Sanders campaign, is a not very expensive
Yeah.
proposal. It's do you mind telling me do you remember what the dollar figure is for that?
I don't know off the top of my head. In fact, there are multiple. It's funny that someone on the team's working on an op-ed that I hope will be out soon, exactly on this. But if people who say they care about economic efficiency and cost savings really did, then they would say, let's stop doing this convoluted lending system where universities are funded through private loans that then, burden the individual with extra fees, with interest, and all this. And let's actually just fund education directly, because you know what happens when you use public dollars to fund education? Well, then the government can actually put some conditions on that money and say, keep tuitions down, keep those
Mm.
administrator salaries down, lift up the staff salaries, lift up the faculty salaries, stop exploiting adjunct labor, stop exploiting the cafeteria workers. So public money, this is why the foremost opponent of college for all, of the college for all bill, was actually 2 and 4 year colleges and universities, because they're pretty happy with the model as it is. It gives them a lot of freedom when what they're doing is charging high tuition and forcing students into debt to cover that. So those are actually our adversaries in the fight ahead.